Hey everyone, this is Xander and I'm now going to be sharing part 2 to my weight loss journey. Before I begin telling the story, may I remind you that this story may contain content that's unsuitable for your children. It also ties into my song lyrics that I told you about previously in part 1. So we're looking at maybe 4 or 5 songs that this story will be tying into. So you're getting a backup story as well. And third and most importantly, I may be doing preaching in this one. So please keep that in mind as you watch this video. Now on with the story. I remember before I went to high school, I went to another high school to do summer school for middle school. When I went to that summer school, it was in 2002. It was my 8th grade year still, but not quite. So with that said, I think I did that summer school for my middle school just to say goodbye to everyone. It was a final farewell to the teachers and my friends before starting the new high school. Summertime was great, but I was looking forward to high school. Before going into the new high school, I was supposed to go into another high school, but it didn't quite pan out too well because my mother wanted me to go into the high school close to where we live. So please keep in mind once again that I'm not going to be mentioning any names. So on with the story again. So with that said, I ended up going into the new high school once my mother had everything situated. What I didn't know about this high school is I was in for a rude awakening. When I say rude awakening, I mean really, really bad. Started out really nice. I ended up switching classes, but apparently the school thought, hey, I need to be in an ESE class. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's nothing bad yet, but going into this ESE class, excuse me for that error, I was in for a surprise and a monster was about to be unleashed out of me. Like, seriously. I was about to meet for the first time the meanest teacher I'd ever meet that would put my grade school teacher that everyone thought was mean to absolute shame. And my desire to have vengeance would come swinging out. Even worse than when I was in grade school. So I remember going into the classroom, and the last thing I recall is, the teacher was nice at first. The kids were nice. It was one whole class I was going to be in. But may I remind you, don't let that fool you. These kids were jokesters and manipulators. And I turned the other cheek for a while. May I remind you, I did that for a while. But at this time, the whole vengeance is mine, saith the Lord, which you can find in the book of Romans, I wasn't really all there with doing that. I was ignoring that. Because I had it in my head back then, if someone does you wrong, you do wrong 10 times worse to them. So, may I remind you, I was pretty screwed up. Society had it to where you had to stand up for yourself or you're going to be looked upon as a wussy. So, what happened was I'm in the class, everything's going smoothly. Until one day, someone decides to throw markers at me. Now remember, this right here ties into my song High School Hell. So they throw markers at me, and I'm turning around and I'm like, who did that? No one admits to it. Next thing they do, they hide my personal belongings, and I don't find it till a couple weeks later. So now I'm starting to gradually get angry at these kids. And it was like, you hide my stuff, you're throwing markers at me, you're making me look like a laughing stock. One of the kids I started out as friends with, this guy ties into my song Travis, because that's exactly what this kid's name was. Last name is confidential. So this kid, he's mentally ill. I didn't know at the time. He pretty nice at first, but he got influenced by the bullies I had, because these kids were gradually going from friendship to bullies to enemy. And what I didn't know is they had some tricks up their sleeves that was going to make that monster peek out little by little. And when that monster comes out, oh boy, disaster is going to strike. An ugly game, meaning who's going to get who's going to take vengeance first, who's going to do what. And with that said, that ugly game was just about starting right at that moment. When the mentally ill kid had got influenced, he became a bully too. I had a classroom full of bullies. I was losing my mind. They continuously nitpicked at me, and I was seriously on the verge of losing my temper. And it got so bad that I told the teacher. Maybe I told him after what I did, but I told the teacher. Teacher tells me to sit down. Doesn't do anything about it. So I got so angry that one day I literally snapped. I got up and I told him exactly what I'm telling you now. If you don't stop, I'm going to beat the crap out of all y'all. And they're laughing, and one of them, who used to get really, really on my nerves, he goes, "Is that a threat?" Manipulatively. And I could not stand looking at that guy, because every time I looked at him, I wanted to grab the back of his neck and slam his head to the table. That's how furiously vengeful I was. I could not look at these kids without thinking of my hands around their throat. Very, very so. Lucky for me, I met a friend there, another friend, who was going through the same thing as me. His name, still confidential, but he had a weight problem. They picked on him too. I looked at him, I turned around, and I said, "Dude." He's like, "Are you going to pick on me?" I'm like, no. And I'm like, "Dude, they're messing with you too?" He's like, "Yeah, they are." I'm like, "You want to talk?" He and I sat there talking. Oh, did we have conversations. And we started plotting revenge. Big time. I sat there with that boy, and all we can think about is plotting revenge on them. We became a team. But they started figuring us out. One of them said, "We know you're talking about us there, both of you." And I looked in the back and I'm like thinking to myself, we wouldn't be talking about you if you weren't jerks to us. So my friend that I was a teammate with, he tells me that he brought a syringe over to school. And he was going to squirt every one of the bullies in the pants. I'm like, yes, vengeance. Oh, yes. But unfortunately, he got caught. And and the syringe got confiscated, and I got even more angry. Like, my temper started to flare. But I do recall one of the kids I did successfully took vengeance on at that time. It was the mentally ill kid. He had me so angry, I took a gift God gave me and wrote nasty things about him on a piece of paper. And when I wrote those things on a piece of paper, he got angry and I got pleasure off his anger. Not knowing that I was about to learn something about him that would change my heart. I would have acted on the things I wanted to do to those kids, but the only thing that stopped me was 3 simple things: God, my mother, and the fact I didn't want to go to jail. Unfortunately, it wasn't the case for that. So time flew by, things got worse and worse and worse. Teacher's not doing anything about it, and I'm getting ticked. I keep going to school, I'm angry, I'm ticked off. And when the teacher didn't want to do anything about it, I remember one day I looked at him dead in his face and I'm like, I guess depending on you doesn't really work now, does it? He says, get out of my classroom right now. As I'm getting out of this man's classroom, all I can think about is all the things those bullies did to me. Throwing book bags at me. One of them threatened to hit me with a chair. And then the teacher had the nerve to let one of the bullies punch me, or so I thought, not knowing I had a bad anger toward that bully. I really wanted to hit him back. But once again, that heart got in the way. It did. It got in the way from me doing that. And when he kicked me out of class, it was like, I gotta tell him what's going on in this class. He comes storming out, yelling at me after all those bullies told him everything. He takes their side. He doesn't listen to my side of the story. And instead, I tell him, you know what goes on in your classroom? Seriously, do you? He's like, shh! I don't want to hear it. I should have you put in juvie for making threats to all those kids and scaring them. I'm like, dude, you're supposed to be a teacher. And he looks at me and says, all you do is you live in a fantasy world and you don't do anything. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, you are the most meanest teacher I've ever met. So depending on the teacher didn't work, I had to go to the law enforcement. Yeah, I went to law enforcement after what happened with my mom. You see, my mom's been sick while I've been going through what I've been going through. We've been going through some things at our home that wasn't good at all. And with her being sick, I gotta tell you, it was horrible. So now I'm going through things at home and I'm going through things at school all at the same time for 4 months. One day it just so appeared she ended up going to the hospital because she was worse off. My aunt was taking care of me for about maybe a month or so. And when she went to the hospital, that's when the school started figuring out things that I ended up, or my brother at the time ended up mentioning something about the water being off. I don't know how that went. But we had bugs in our house. The officer came, saw the bugs. And that was the opportunity I gave to myself to tell the officer, excuse me, I actually made an error there. Tell the officer what's going on with me in school. I told him I was getting bullied and I was making threats. He looks at me calmly, says, don't make threats again. And then he said he talked to the class. I figured if I get rid of their excuse, they'd have no excuse. So I did myself a good deed. So time progressed and the cop didn't show up that day, but he did show up to talk about bullying. And I was happy. But that didn't help anything. I ended up being called Tug Me by the one bully I was trying to get forgiveness from, but he wouldn't listen to me. When I found out that he was mentally ill from his coach that he had, it changed my heart to try to make things right, but it never worked out. So, with that said, he was the hardest person for forgiveness, because every time I asked for forgiveness or wanted forgiveness from him, he'd call me Tug Me and wouldn't want me to talk to him at all. I was planning on getting his friends to have him talk to me so I can make things right, but that didn't pan out too well either. So, with that said, the teacher later did something about it. When he finally did something about it, he talked to both parties. Me and the head bully in charge of all the kids, the ringleader, about leaving each other alone. I was happy. After that happened, not a lot of people bullied me that much. Maybe a select few, but not much. I think most of the bullying came from me scratching myself at the time and smelling myself, and when that happened, a lot of what went down was the cause of that. So, with that said, I learned an important lesson. I ended up leaving that school in December due to the fact that DCF thought I was being neglected. So I left the school in December, and I never forgotten about it, but what I was in for was a major surprise, because the next place I'd move into was Lakeland, and I would move into a trailer park. This has been part 2 of my weight loss journey, and may I also remind you, every little bit of what you see in this story happened to be my motivation. And I also forgot to tell you that when I went to that school, I started rapping as well. I did. And that relates to my song, Rapping Ain't Easy. That school also helped me with my other video I did, which is A Stronger Man, which is another video and another story you can check out on my channel. But Rapping Ain't Easy, I would tell you that I learned a few things about rapping, getting into a rap battle, and choking in that school. Choking meaning I either forgot my words or I couldn't say anything else. And when I started rapping, I got the you suck treatment, the poor treatment, and I learned a hard lesson that would gradually end up teaching me something later on in my life. And with that said, I never stopped rapping, because when you start, you can't stop. And that's one of the things I probably mentioned in the song. So, like I said, this has been part 2. I'm happy to tell you my weight loss journey. You have a great day, and God bless you. Bye.